My name is Daniel Lutaya, and today we have Kathleen Sherwin, the outgoing CEO and incoming board member of Women Deliver, and Melia Khan, the president and CEO of Women Deliver. It's very lovely to have you two ladies here with us.
Thanks for having us.
So first, we want to understand what Women Deliver is all about, and I want you to speak to our audience, which is the African women and people on the continent of Africa.
Great, thank you for that question, Daniel. So Women Deliver is a global advocacy organization that champions people who are working towards gender equality all over the globe. We have a lot of programming in Africa. We support champions of gender equality, particularly young people. In the African continent, we have over 1,000 sort of young champions across the world, including some in Rwanda itself, but across, like I said, across the continent. So what we try to do is work on policy advocacy initiatives and support those that are representing marginalized communities, the closest to the ground, in reaching decision makers and trying to influence them towards policies, particularly around sexual reproductive health, that focus on gender equality.
Well, Kathleen is outgoing, meaning she's done what you're going to be doing for a longer time than you now. Yeah, much longer. So Kathleen, from where the issues of gender equality were at the time that you joined Women Deliver to now, when you are moving on, what is the difference like? Have you seen impact? Have you seen a difference from when you started?
Sure. Well, so I've been with the organization for a little over 5 years, so there's been huge changes. I mean, in some ways, there's been dramatic change in gender equality for the positive. If you look here in the African continent, we know that girls' education has gone up, maternal mortality has gone down, women in leadership roles has gone up by 30%. So here in the continent, there's been huge success. Now, that said, though, we've had COVID. And the impact of COVID has seen an increase in gender-based violence for girls and women. In the African continent, 47% increase since the pandemic in GBV. So there are trade-offs. I think also you see a rise of a lot of governments around the world not taking the steps that we're seeing in Rwanda to advance gender equality and the gender gaps. We heard this morning when the First Lady of Rwanda spoke, the World Economic Forum quotes Rwanda as 7th globally and 2nd in Africa for closing the gender gap. That's really rare. Really post-pandemic, again, we're seeing the issue of gender equality, the gender gap exacerbated by it. Looking at the health workforce, predominantly women. So it's so there's some trade-offs, but ultimately huge gains here in the African continent, but overall some setbacks due to COVID.
Melia, in your opinion, the reasons for these setbacks, is it that we don't want to close the gender gap, or is it that countries and governments just do not have the resources to do it? And does it even require any resources? Because, well, you are advocating for something that is nice, everybody wants it, but it seems just, what's failing?
Well, I think there's a number of things that are happening all at once. Because of the pandemic and because of some of the other crises that we've been seeing around the world, governments' budgets are very constrained. We had to put so many resources into the pandemic, and then the economy also went down because of it. So we're seeing governments losing focus on issues that are really important for gender equality. And sort of moving away from the sort of budgetary support that's needed for that. And the other thing that I think has happened is because of the pandemic, schools were closed, people were isolating at home. There was a lot of pressure on families, and that led to, of course, increased gender-based violence, increased isolation of women and girls. From their sort of cohorts that provided them with support. So I think that's been the primary reason why there's been an increase in gender-based violence, a decrease in services towards girls and women, and that has led to some of this. In addition, of course, we've seen, not here in Rwanda, but in other places, societal push back against some of the increases in that. And that is, that's unfortunate, but I think often happens when real progress starts to be made. People become a bit concerned about the direction that might be going because it's change and it's a new area. So I think that given time and effort, and if all our focus remains on gender equality like you've been able to do in Rwanda, that we'll be able to regain the sort of step backs we've had and continue our progress.
Kathleen, and on that note that she says about cultural pushbacks, and this is something that affects a lot of African countries. When it comes to gender equality, there is gender roles, there is all sorts of things. And it looks like society has been this way for a very long time, and even some of the women don't actually know that they deserve to have these rights. What has been your experience like dealing with these? But also, how do you think we can advance the gender equality to close the gender gap in a space where we have societies that simply don't recognize that there is a need?
You're absolutely right. Gender norms are entrenched. It absolutely includes boys and men need to be part of this conversation. It's really important that we have male engagement because it starts with those entrenched norms, those gender stereotypes, and those have to be broken down. So it's having those conversations very early days. Everything about looking at dividing household labor. Women do the predominantly amount around the world globally, right, of the sort of household work, unpaid care. That has to change. And so, for us here in Rwanda, there's a wonderful program called Men Engage that works with organizations to educate boys and men, but also the family system to be able to tackle those norms early on. So we're a huge proponent of that, and that will be something that we'll be talking about at the conference.
And then what about the women themselves, trying to make them understand? Is it something that you think maybe, what requires to be done? Should we do more engagements? Should we go to the ground more often? Should we, talk to them in a language they understand? What needs to be done to ensure that at least we reach as many people as possible? But more importantly, that the women and the men understand that this is something that is required in order for development to happen?
Sure. The solutions are almost always at the grassroots level. We just have to pay attention to them and lift them up. I think one piece is ensuring that women's rights organizations that are grassroots oriented on the ground get the funding that they need to be able to do this work. They have the ideas. They are the ones in the households, in the clinics, in the schools, being able to share this information, but they're all, especially during pandemics, are not adequately funded. So that's one aspect that's really important. I think that, again, being able to support also youth advocacy programs that really focus on this. But to say the ideas are there, that, it's really about the funding that's sort of missing in this equation.
Now, we faced a challenge in some African countries. I'll talk about Africa because that's where I live. Yeah. But we faced a challenge with some of the African countries. And some experts have called it tokenism, where, in a cabinet of 80 people, they'll choose 2 women and say, oh yeah, we see that we have women at the table. How do we deal with that?
Well, that is a problem in many, many contexts. And I think the solution is to continue to do it. So you may start with 2 women in a cabinet, but you may, slowly increase the number. And I think it's also an intergenerational, sort of process. You might only have a few women in political office or in administration or in the private sector, but as the time goes on and as more and more women become educated, and as the new generation not only becomes educated but actually demands a different world, as girls demand a seat at the table. At the youth forum, someone was saying that a girl spoke about the saying that's nothing about us without us, and she said, actually, let's not say that. Let's say nothing without us. So that it doesn't have to be about us. It doesn't have to be about us, because everything in the world is about half the population, because half the population is female. So to me, it would be that you just keep including women. The women who are at the table will make more room, and as people see the benefits of including half the population, of including the viewpoints of so much of the people who are going to be affected by these decisions and affected by the things that are taking place, people will start to open up. And as generations go through, and it doesn't take that long, we'll start to see more and more women at real decision-making places within the context. But political support is also really important at the highest level, and I think where you see that, then you see some real change.
Kathleen, you've been advocating for longer than the both of us here, but I want to know, when you're advocating, you are looking at a particular goal. At what point will you sit back and say, mic drop, job done? Yeah.
When we don't have to have this interview about, so no, I mean, when girls and women are equal, and that's not here yet. I mean, there's still a huge gender gap. And, when we advocate alongside girls and women globally, but, where there's some countries that have made huge progress, there's other countries that are much further behind. I think Rwanda, we find ourselves in a wonderful place. As we say, 60% of the political parliament is women. There's been huge addresses related to education. We know that the minister has a huge priority around looking at child defilement, looking at GBV. So, in countries such as Rwanda, there's this huge progress, but there's many other countries that the political system isn't focused on girls and women. So we'll advocate when everyone is equal. We're not quite there yet.
What does the near future look like for you in as far as the push to close the gender gap is concerned? What does the near future look like? Because it looks like COVID is done, but it did a lot of damage. From the country where I come from, we've had rates of gender-based violence going skyrocketing. We've had, girls getting teenage pregnancies have gone through the roof. We've gone 4 steps back, really. So what does the near future look like, in your opinion?
I think you've mentioned it, Daniel. There needs to be a double, tripled, reinforcement of the efforts that we've been making over the past few decades. Because this pandemic, the experts estimate that set us back 10 years in terms of our gender equality goals. For GBV, gender-based violence, for early childhood marriage, for educational attainment. So many girls were out of school, and many of them didn't go back to school after the schools reopened. And that's a huge setback in terms of our goals. I think the real efforts are going to have to be around universal health care, making sure that we're stronger for any future medical emergencies or health emergencies that might happen, like the pandemic. We need to make sure that we renew our efforts around education so that girls not only go back to school, but have better attainment and retention in schools. And we need to make sure that sexual reproductive health care and bodily autonomy is restored for girls and women going forward, because without those we will never make progress. As a society, not just women won't make progress. And I think that's really, really important we focus on those.
Kathleen, all the things that she says are what we have to do. How does the Women Deliver Conference of 2023, how does it fit into that, and how important is such a conference to achieving all the goals that she set out? They're quite a number, though.
Yes, well, it's an ambitious conference as well. So it's the first time we're in the African continent. The conference will be July 17th for 2023 in Kigali. 6,000 people on site, 200,000 people joining us online. It is the largest conference in the world on gender equality. And it's so important because the agenda is co-developed by advocates, by youth, by adolescents, by grassroots advocates. It's so important. And this conference will talk about all the issues we just talked about. GBV, climate will be important, unpaid care. And we have such collective action. When you bring together over 200,000 people together to talk about a topic at the same time, it creates so much momentum, and that's really important to us. The conference also will tie into so many other policy windows that happen in our space for which change has happened. So the Generation Equality Forum, which has committed $40 billion to girls and women, will also be at our conference convening. And taking stock about what's worked and where they have to go. So we're really excited to be able to have this conference. We're not announcing the theme quite yet, but absolutely the topics we just talked about, online and in-person GBV, gender-based violence is really important, unpaid care and climate are absolutely at the top of the list. And then also, how do we come back after COVID? There's a number of changes that need to be made on health system strengthening, and that will also be a key topic of the conference.
I just want to know how important the continent where this conference is being held for the first time here, because I do know that Africa is one of the continents that is worst hit by the issues that you have been advocating for all time. So how important is it that this conference is actually being held on the African continent?
It's very, very important for us, and we did an extensive participatory sort of search as what the next venue of the conference was going to be, and we're really, really delighted with the fact that it's going to be here in Africa, in Kigali, and that Rwanda is going to be hosting it with us. I think, you know, the real movement and the real change, as Kathleen had said earlier, really does happen at the grassroots level with those communities that are the most vulnerable and marginalized. And by centering and championing those advocates that come and represent those communities is very important. And for them to see the importance of a global conference with, we estimate, you know, people from 165 countries coming from it and being here in Africa, in Kigali, and being able to talk with those advocates, and for them to be seeing themselves as being centered in that decision making and in the debate, talking to heads of states, heads of government, the heads of UN agencies, parliamentarians, ministers, the head of private sectors, companies. That's where the real, we come up with innovative ideas, we come up with imaginative solutions, and we really push to have the solutions implemented towards gender equality. So we're delighted that we're able to host it here in Africa.
All right, I'll give you 30 seconds each to give your closing remarks, parting shots. What do you want to tell the public in 30 seconds?
Great. Well, I hope that you'll all attend the next conference, July 20th, 17th through 20th in Kigali next year. Again, the largest conference in history on gender equality. So we hope to see you there.
Absolutely delighted that Kigali will be hosting us. Looking forward to an intergenerational, intersectoral conference that focuses on gender equality.
Thank you very much, Kathleen Sherwin, outgoing CEO and incoming board member, and Mehriya Khan, President and CEO of Women Deliver. It has been amazing speaking to you, and I hope that the next time we speak, we'll be celebrating something and not talking about how bad things have gotten after COVID, isn't it? Great. My name is Daniel Lutaya. Thank you very much.